My name is Michelle Taylor, and I'm with the Digital Cultural Heritage Research Cluster here at Vanderbilt. Today we are going to have a basic introduction to XML. So what is XML and why do I care? XML stands for Extensible Markup Language, which is a markup language that defines a set of rules for encoding documents. XML is more interested in the meaning of data than in its presentation. There are things we can do to XML after it's been created to make it look a certain way, say for a PDF output or for a web page, but when you're creating XML, you're mostly concerned with its semantic value. XML is composed of many different flavors. If you were to just look at the Wikipedia page for XML, you'd probably see about 50 different varieties of XML. The one we're going to be focusing on most for our Digital Cultural Heritage Research Cluster is TEI, the Text Encoding Initiative. And there's also MEI, the Music Encoding Initiative, Beer XML, and all sorts of other varieties. XML is designed to store and transport data in a way that is both software and hardware independent and human and machine readable. An important distinction to make is between well-formed and valid XML. If a document is well-formed, it conforms to all the basic rules of XML, which we're going to go over shortly. If it's valid, it conforms to the rules of a schema. So it's possible for a document to be well-formed but not be valid, and we'll come back to this at the end. So XML can be envisioned as a tree from root to leaf. We have an example on the right here of an XML tree structure. All XML has a root element, which is the parent of all the other elements in the document. In this image here, the root element is bookstore. And all of the relationships between the elements are described in familial terms. So you can have parent elements, child elements, sibling elements, grandchildren elements. In this example here, bookstore has a child element called book. And that element, book, has 4 child elements of its own, titled title, author, year, and price. And these 4 elements could be said to be the grandchildren of the element bookstore. So elements can be composed of text content, other elements, attributes, or any combination of those things. So here we have another way of envisioning the XML tree. This is what it would look like within an XML editor, such as Oxygen XML editor. You'll see that we still have the root element bookstore, but it opens at the very top of the example and closes at the very end. All of that is all part of the bookstore element. Then we still have its 2 book elements nested inside there, and book elements 4 child elements nested inside there, all represented by various levels of indentations to help visualize the tree. So we're going to go over now all of the XML rules to live by for creating well-formed XML. XML documents must contain 1 root element, and because we focus primarily on TEI for this research cluster, I'll go ahead and say that the root element for TEI is always TEI in capital letters. The next thing we have here is an XML prologue, which is optional, but something that Oxygen will put in for you automatically. If it exists, it has to come first in the document. Its purpose is to contain information that applies to the document as a whole. So it tells you about character encoding, document structure, style sheets, etc. And the prologue is immediately followed by the opening tag of the root element. So all elements must have an opening and closing tag. Those are represented by angle brackets or greater and less than signs. The only exception to that rule is that elements in the prologue don't have a closing tag, but because that's not something you have to type in yourself, as we just talked about, it's not really something you have to worry about. As I mentioned before, XML tags are case sensitive, so uppercase TEI is not the same as lowercase TEI. XML elements must be properly nested, so I have here a bad example of XML and a good example of XML. In the first example, we have B and I elements representing bold and italic. The problem with the bad example is that the B tag is closed before the I tag is closed, so things are not properly nested. In the good example, right below that, you see that the I tag is closed before the B tag is closed, so that example is properly nested. So now let's briefly talk about attribute values, which must always be quoted. In this note date example here, note is the element, date is the attribute of that element, which I like to think of as an adjective. It describes the element and gives more information about the element. And then the part in quotation marks is the attribute value, which in this case is a date. So element, attribute, value. There are 5 entity references, which are characters that have special meaning in XML. Their improper use will generate an XML error. So the reason why these 5 characters are important is because they are already used for an important purpose in XML. So we already talked about how the less than and greater than signs are used as angle brackets to open and close tags. If you were to try to type those into regular prose within your text as the symbols they are, you would get an error. So to represent those characters, you instead use an ampersand, and then in the case of less than, an LT to stand for less than, and then a semicolon. Similar thing for greater than. The ampersand character is used, as you can see, to actually represent these entity references. And so for that reason, the ampersand is also an entity reference itself. And then we have the apostrophe and the quotation mark, which are used to surround attribute values, and that's why those are special characters. So there is a syntax for creating comments in XML. This can be useful if you're working on a communal project and you want to be able to leave a comment for someone else, or if you want to kind of leave a gap and say, hey, we need to come back in later and fill in this area. You leave a comment by opening an angle bracket and then putting an exclamation point and 2 hyphens, then typing the text of your comment, then following the text of your comment by 2 hyphens and a closing angle bracket. The only rule for this is that you can't put 2 hyphens or dashes in the middle of the comment because that will lead the XML to believe that you are closing the comment. Another important thing to note is that white space is preserved in XML. XML does not truncate multiple white spaces, so it's important to be cognizant of the way that you're using white space. If you follow all of the rules we just discussed, then you'll have a well-formed XML document. So just to zero in a little bit more on elements and attributes, which are the heart of your XML. XML documents are composed of XML elements, and an XML element is everything from the element's opening tag to the closing tag. So in our familiar example to the right here, the bookstore element is represented by the entirety of that text. The first book element is represented by lines 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So lines 2 through 7 are all part of the element book. And then you see the book's child element title is all represented in just 1 line there. So again, just to review, elements can contain text, attributes, other elements, or any combination of the above. Elements can be empty. So that just means they have no content in them. That can be represented in 2 different ways. The first way is simply to not type any text where the text would appear, and that's the first way that it appears. The second way you're seeing there is to type in the element name followed by a slash and then close the element with an angle bracket, and that is also said to be an empty element. There are several naming rules for elements. Elements are case sensitive. They must start with a letter or an underscore. They cannot start with the letters XML. They can contain letters, digits, hyphens, underscores, or periods, but they cannot contain spaces. So just to quickly zero in on attributes here one more time, XML elements can, but don't have to have, attributes. They're designed to contain data related to a specific element, and again, I think of them kind of as adjectives, giving us more information about that element. Here are 2 examples of elements that take attributes. In the first one, we have female as the value of the attribute gender. In the second one, the value of the attribute name is George Shotgun Ziegler. This is also a nice example because it includes an entity reference. The word shotgun as a nickname would normally appear in quotes, but because it's already appearing within a quoted attribute value, we have to use an entity reference, which is the ampersand QUOT semicolon on both sides of the word shotgun to indicate that that would appear in quotes. Okay, and just to briefly return to our idea of well-formed versus valid, A valid XML document must be well-formed, which means that it follows all the rules that we just went over, but it also conforms to a schema, which is an additional set of rules. A schema defines the rules and legal element names and attributes for an XML document. So most large projects will have schemas that further delineate rules for creating documents, including which elements are allowed to appear where, what kind of attributes those elements are allowed to take, etc. And we will be covering schemas in more detail in a future video. Okay, this PowerPoint has been adapted with permission from materials created by Ramona Romero, so I just wanted to say thank you for that. It also contains images from the W3 schools under the terms of academic fair use. So our next video will be about TEI, a specific branch of XML, stands for the Text Encoding Initiative, and is the major focus of the Digital Cultural Heritage Research Cluster this year. Thank you.